Welcome to today's webinar about engaging students in the classroom. My name is Ashok from Pole Everywhere. We are fortunate to have John Damaso with us today. He teaches AP English at Brophy College Preparatory in Arizona. John uses a number of web services and apps to engage his students both in and out of the class. He uses apps to hold students' attention and to improve learning outcomes. Today, he'll share with us a few of the tools he uses that he finds effective. John has a pretty interactive session with us today. With that, I'll turn over the presentation to John. John?
Thanks, Ashok, and thank you to Pole Everywhere for this opportunity to discuss with educators at all levels the practice of engaging students in the classroom. As Ashok said, I teach at Brophy College Prep in Phoenix, the Jesuit all-boys high school. And I always like to set the context before any class I teach or any presentation I give. So as he said, it will be fairly interactive. What you're looking at right now is a panoramic shot of my classroom. What my students always point out is over on the right side, kind of in the corner, is my desk, usually piled up with things from August to May. But where they find me most is either in the back here or even in the center among them. We've all heard the metaphor sage on the stage and how that's given way a little bit recently to the guide on the side. I'm working on something maybe more akin to mentor from the center for those who love rhyming. And here's a typical shot from my classroom where we're engaged in a discussion that was started by a poll. So that's my context, and I share it with you because I think that's where all great teaching starts. In addition, part of my context as an educator is to leverage and extend all technology that will benefit my students' learning. And I write about this frequently on my blog at johndamaso.com, and I try to engage and connect with other educators through Twitter at Mr. John Damaso. So I really encourage you to find me there and to share your best practices with me, as I hope to do with you today. Most of my classes, like this presentation, will start with some means of engagement. So I encourage you right now to navigate your browser over to poleev.com/Damaso. And when you do that, you should see a live poll. That poll is a new type of poll I've been experimenting with in the classroom. It's called a clickable image. So I've created an XY set of axes here. And the reason why I start with this, and you'll see the pins being dropped as those votes are made live. The reason why I offer this and not a multiple choice question sometimes is students have to justify the precise placement of their pin. You'll notice you guys figured out quite quickly how to vote here. I didn't explain it much. You looked at the X and the Y axes and decided where your current teaching, whether it's primary, secondary, collegiate, postdoc, you decided for yourself where that falls. And this helps set the context for our discussion today. You'll notice I'm about to show you where I put myself. So about 15–16% of you put yourself in the box where I consider my teaching to currently fall. Sometimes we have a one-size-fits-all solution. Sometimes we try to be more customized or individualized. And it looks like above the x-axis we have many of our votes as experimental teachers. So I'm hoping you'll kind of get on board with me today as I share some web services, some apps that I think really help me engage my students in and outside of the classroom. Pole Everywhere being the first I'll share. So here's our agenda today. We have some built-in activities. We also have some built-in Q&A sessions. I'm hoping first to address the why, the what, and the how of student engagement. Then I'll focus most of the presentation on the how, right, using things like Pole Everywhere to engage students through student response systems. I'll then talk about how I leverage Google Apps for Education. And then finally, I'll conclude with 2 case uses from my English classroom with some web services that I have found to create great individualized student engagement. So my hope and my goal for you by the end of this presentation is to have 3 takeaways. It's August. I start school tomorrow. Some of your semesters begin this month as well. I'm hoping you can take away an idea, a type of polling, an approach, a lesson, even an entire unit, or maybe an individual app that you can deploy immediately. That's sort of my educational philosophy, is immediate deployment before we assess how well it's working. So I want you to come away with 3, and at the end of this session, I'll ask you to share via a poll one of those takeaways. So let's start with the why. Why are we engaging? Why are we trying to engage? Maybe that black and white photo on the right typifies your classroom, maybe it doesn't. But we know that depending on the research we access, that attention spans are about 7 to 10 minutes in a focused way. So we also know that there's some contentiousness about whether students can actually multitask or whether they're just task switching. So if we look at the black and white photo, we have some students who are switching between the tasks of taking notes and yawning and daydreaming or mugging for the camera like this fellow here, or maybe this couple of students engaged in note passing, or perhaps today playing a game of Candy Crush together. So all of this helps me contextually to understand that I have a duty to get every voice in this room heard, similar to all you attendees, and also to meet my students where they are when it comes to social media, technology, where they are in their maturation, where they are in their psychological development. And in particular, when I focus on this picture, I looked at this young woman in the front, and the way her hand is held, it reminded me so much of holding a phone. So a lot of my teaching philosophy comes from, well, what if the phone is in her hand? What if it's at her head? Or what if it's in her gaze? What can I do to leverage that to engage her? Now, ideally, today's seminar would just be 6 minutes and 40 seconds. If you haven't heard of Pecha, it's a system of giving presentations developed by a Japanese architecture and design firm for very quickly conveying an idea through 20-second timed slides that auto-run, and that will force us to make our point and sit down. Now, maybe this is something you use in your classroom already. Certainly it's something that I aspire to, so that we can free up more time to do more collaboration and more creation with our students. So let's jump right back in. There's another live poll asking you a question about ideal class size, because there's a lot of research on class size as well. And when you think about student engagement, maybe you're wondering, how the heck can I engage my students when I have so many of them? So let's just answer that question. Not what do you have, but what is your ideal class size? So again, you can navigate to your browser at pollev.com/Damaso, and we have about 100 votes coming in so far. This summer I read the Malcolm Gladwell book, David and Goliath. He talks about class size a little bit and surveys some of the research. When he polled a lot of teachers, they said 18 to 24 is ideal because an introvert is an introvert, whether it's in a small group of 4 or whether it's in a giant auditorium university class of 400. We all, every year, probably lament the growing size of our classes, but there is a way to engage each individual student. I'm hoping to show you some of those ways today. So it looks, and we'll have a chance to ask questions about this, but it looks like the bulk, about 90%, believe it's somewhere between 9 and 32, which is probably the state of most American classrooms today. So before I get into all the apps and web services, I wanted to kind of show you what engagement can look like outside of those things. And these are my guiding principles. Like I said, to meet students where they are, to give them options, almost as a menu would, and to connect them to the outside world, to let them know that what they're doing is not in isolation in a classroom setting, that it has applicability. People care what students are creating and thinking, and there are professionals in every discipline that want to engage those students. So that is my hope. You can see one way of engaging students is just by using some of the commercial software around them. So iTunes and the App Store in particular has a subset for education, which I scour frequently to find apps that I think I can utilize in the classroom. This led me to meeting my students where they are, and I teach teenage boys, so that meant meeting them through video games sometimes. So we were reading The Great Gatsby, and I found this old throwback NES version of The Great Gatsby, and I showed that to them. And there's something miraculous that happens when you show something to students that they thought they should have shown you first, and that leads to a lot of engagement. We were doing a unit on typography and the history of fonts and how they're made. So I found a great interactive puzzler game on the iPad called Typewriter. And that allowed students to navigate through the history of fonts and typefaces. When we were reading mysteries and talking about dystopias, I found an iPad puzzler narrative called Device 6, which combined both traditional reading with gameplay and trivia questions and solving puzzles for them to unlock the next chapter. So that was me meeting my students where they were in terms of gaming on the iPad. But I also want my students to read traditionally. We do annotation. We mark up our text with marginalia. And I found that by asking students to tell me what they wanted to look for in a text, that I could engage them further. And so I used Google Form very quickly to ask students what they wanted to look for in a personalized active reading proposal. The form took 2 minutes to create and deploy, and students could very quickly tell me what their active reading would look like. And here's the spreadsheet in the Google Sheet that I saw on the back end. What's lovely about this, and you'll see this in green, all the ways that students are taking control of their reading assignment. They're not being told what to do. Sure, I model good annotation and we talk about what can go in the margins of their text, but here it's a lot of I'm going to, I want to, I would like to, I would analyze, and this helps with engagement. Here's the inside cover of one of their paper novels, where as he made his way through different portions of the book, he actually updated a key for his active reading as his interest changed. On the topic of reading, another way I try to engage is by giving more modalities to the way students consume literature. Here we were studying Melville, and so I made one of many works on LibriVox available to students. LibriVox is just a public domain database of a bunch of audiobooks. And so here students could read a difficult text and listen to it by voice actors. And a lot of my students have come to rely on these audio texts. Nonetheless, we still get students that look like this. I won't call him bored, I'll just call him disengaged. And so we try to throw different tech solutions at this kind of student. Some years ago we had the clickers, but they were single use, and they couldn't be expanded. So much like handing the phone to the young woman in the front row, we have devices like the Chromebook or the iPad or this other kind of slate computers or even desktop computers, or the devices that students bring with them in their pockets. And I'm not saying it's the end-all be-all solution, but it's enabled me to engage my students because it's more of an open platform. So today, I'm hoping to show you 3 sets of apps and web services. One you've already seen with Poll Everywhere. I'm about to introduce Today's Meet and Padlet, and then we'll finish that set with Remind, which 1 in 5 American teachers currently use. I'll then go into how I use the Google Apps suite through Google Classroom, which was announced last spring. And then I'll end, like I said, with a couple of case uses for English, namely Membean and NoRed Ink. This presentation will be shared with you at the end, and all of these icons are clickable so that you can pursue these on your own as well. So, we talked about the why. Let's talk about the what just for a moment. If we're trying to create global digital citizens at the primary, secondary, and collegiate level, I think we do the solution fluency and information fluency pretty well. I think what some of the technology I use has enabled me to do is really capitalize and enhance these bottom 3, helping students be creative, to use their devices for creation, to collaborate, and to be more fluent in the media that they use. So we spend a lot of time helping students understand the world that they're living in. So how do I decide what to engage them with? I ask them. It seems like the most simple solution. So again, using a Google form, I ask my students periodically, sometimes as an end of the year wrap-up survey, ask them what worked, what units needed redevelopment, which assignments led to their learning, what type of feedback do they like, do they prefer, where do they feel prepared or unprepared. And so I get this really great data that I can mull over, over Christmas or over the summer. What type of writing feedback was most helpful? And now I know that they really like those narrative notes from teacher to student. Where was their improvement? Was it in writing or reading or vocabulary usage? And then the old what do I wish for question. And this helps me, think kind of moonshot pie in the sky ideas for engagement. This is sort of a cautionary slide. I asked them a question that I knew would be a little bit problematic. I said, all right, you're running the class. We read 10 books from American Lit. Which one would you replace? And I got all sorts of responses. And I know that's small, but I just want to highlight a few to tell you that, yes, you can ask students how to engage them, but you should also use the professional training that you have to make good choices on their behalf. So of course they're going to want to get rid of the Puritan story from the Romantic period by Hawthorne, The Scarlet Letter, and insert instead a drug-induced road to the heart of the American dream by Hunter S. Thompson. So you have to take some of these things with a grain of salt. Here's a student that after a year still, I guess, didn't understand that we were studying American literature because he's offering that maybe we should read the Odyssey, but I'm not really sure. And then finally, this summer we had the book by Harper Lee come out, Ghost Set of Watchmen. I've never seen this particular title, How to Kill a Mockingbird. It's some kind of foul extinction manual or something, but this is for laughs here. But the point is, you are the organizer of their learning. You are sort of that mentor at the center. But it is a good idea to take with a grain of salt some of the feedback they give you on what engages them. So let's talk about the how now. How do I engage students in the class? I'll kind of show you the way I used to do it and then the way I'm doing it now, sort of a then and now. In the old days, I stand in front of the class, I ask one student one question, we all wait to hear his one answer. Now I can ask all the students that question and we can see and also discuss all of the answers that come out of it. And I do this every single day, almost every period at polev.com/Damaso. I just want to showcase some of the polls that I use. Of course, if you're a user, you know about multiple choice and open-ended and the newer brainstorm, ranking, and clickable image survey types. Did you know that you can insert these directly into a presentation to get student engagement? There's another clickable image poll that I'll discuss shortly. I always try to engage students through fun first. So pop up a hilarious poll EV on the screen to win their engagement. So we all love the movie from, I think it's 1986, Top Gun, and the very famous song sung by Maverick and Goose there. This is not a live poll, by the way. I know you want to vote. I try to then transition from fun to course content. And a lot of you are thinking, well, how's this course content? Well, we were studying the great unknown of the depths of the ocean and the old man in the sea. We were looking at the movie Jaws. And so I asked them this somewhat topical, but still kind of frivolous and fun question. What do Brody, Quint, and Hooper all need? Of course, a bigger boat. And then we get to move into questions that really engage them and help me redesign curriculum and instruction. So they were preparing for the PSAT, very simple forced choice question, and then I got to emphasize critical reading a little bit more as I designed future lessons. You can reflect on an assessment that you've given them and ask them to give you their reflection. So I knew at the end of this assessment, this writing challenge they had, that tone versus mood and that distinction was difficult for some of them, and that helped me retool and refine my design of instruction. You can also use questions like this to wrap up a unit. We were talking about the American dream, the American experience, and we've all heard about the melting pot story of immigration. We offered them some other possible metaphors, and who knew that so many of them would latch on to the chunky stew metaphor to describe the American experience. I believe this may have been right before lunch, but I'm not sure. But this led to a really great discussion. So I use polls to kickstart my classes. Here's another wrap-up question, open-ended, and then immediately with one click I was able to take all of their responses, turn them into a word cloud, and this led to a great discussion as well. I collect writing this way, maybe a thesis statement from every student anonymously, and then we can do some anonymous workshopping of the thesis statements. If I just want to kind of divide the room into 2 or 3 or 4 groups, I can ask a question about what we're studying. In this case, we're talking about retributive versus restorative justice, and this led to 3 factions that entered into a classroom debate. A newer poll type from Poll Everywhere is the brainstorm, where everyone can respond with a free answer. And then they can kind of prioritize that list, voting things up and down, kind of in a method that they're familiar with from Reddit. And then this will help you prioritize. For me, I use it when I'm planning activities with student clubs to find out what their fears are or what pitfalls they foresee. And then that gave us 3 or 4 to really focus on. So that's kind of brainstorming. Here's a clickable image I use. I'll use this week, in fact, to figure out what are the most pivotal moments in a novel. So Holden Caulfield goes through Catcher in the Rye all throughout Manhattan, and students had to kind of pick 2 spots that they felt were most intriguing or most led to his development or maturation. Here's another clickable image where this is just kind of a basic check for understanding. As we retaught the elements of short fiction, I gave them a plot point from the story they read, and they had to drop a pin on where that fell in the plot structure. And so most of my students showed mastery by clicking climax there. Here's another one of those XY axes questions. We were studying the podcast Serial, and we were looking at tone, we were looking at bias, and we were looking at how complete a picture Sarah Koenig was painting in that particular podcast. And this helped me understand if they were listening, and since most of them thought she was thorough, this whole group got to kind of talk about who this outlier was. You can also, like I showed you earlier, put a box around the correct answer. And not that there was a correct answer here as they assessed the letter from a Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King, but the students really wanted me to divide the people above the x-axis and the below. And so these students then organized physically in the classroom into 2 big groups. And they found a really good conversation from this particular poll. So that's kind of the first third of the how. I'm going to engage some other apps with you in a moment, but I want to leave the presentation just momentarily so that we can take a few questions for about 2 or 3 minutes. So using the tool in GoToWebinar, you should have a chance to ask some questions. I'm seeing some questions about class time. How much class time is actually spent with polling versus discussion? It's a great question. Most of my polls, I would say 50% or more, I create in the spot, in the moment. So a student says something, triggers something in my mind, and then I immediately, within about 15 seconds, can deploy a question. Those will remain on the screen during the discussion, but it's, you know, in a 50 or 60-minute class, if you just plan to have conversation that day, that could be done with, you know, 4, 5, 6 polls, and that's it. So that's a very good question. Thank you, Kent. Question about Poll Everywhere and its cost. Most educators can have an account for up to 40 voters at any time, and that's a free account. And I must have 500-600 polls in my account, and that's free. My students, yes, for my context, they do have devices. So I'm in a one-to-one environment with iPads at my school, Brophy Prep. Great question, Wendy. Thank you. Bonnie had a question about students with dumb phones, and they can't participate in the way that I'd like them to. I'm lucky that I have a one-to-one environment. Even if they have a so-called dumb phone, if they have texting on there, they can participate in Poll Everywhere. They don't have to have an app or anything. It's a question about how long does it take to create these. Like I said, I can make one in 15 seconds from start to finish. So I can do them on the spot, and most of mine are made on the spot, like I said. I'm looking at just a couple more questions, and then I'll transition here. A lot of questions about how long does it take. And again, like most things, if you practice, your time goes way down. So my students will say, hey, why don't you ask us this question via Poll Everywhere, and I'll just do it right there on the spot, 15 seconds. How do you engage technology-averse student? Half of my classes are 40-plus mid-career changers. Just drag them kicking and screaming, basically. Great question. I've taught adults as well. On back-to-school night with parents, in fact, I try to engage them with technology, so I know what you mean. I would say try one thing, deploy one thing. And if it fails, it doesn't mean that it's always going to fail. It doesn't mean that they're always going to disengage. But I would just try one thing in one class. And you'll see some other tools here momentarily. Final question here, how do I get engagement in the class without losing their attention? The students want to use the internet instead of checking the class. I don't know, I think the best metaphor I've used for describing quality teaching is those little stuffed monkeys with the cymbals that you wind up or put batteries in, or someone juggling flaming chainsaws. That's how I view my work. So I want to be more interesting, I want my content more interesting, I want my manner of engagement and collaboration to be more interesting than those web searches or checking ESPN or watching Netflix. So I know that puts a huge onus on the teacher, but I think if you are kind of juggling these many engaging apps and web services, you can make your class more interesting than the distraction. I'll also talk about how to make distraction useful in a few moments. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again here and see if I can jump back in. Another answer to the question how, besides Poll Everywhere, is something called Padlet. So I'm going to ask you to look at the link in the discussion area and click on that to get over to Padlet. In the old days, we'd collect papers, I'd review them, I'd figure out which ones I wanted to post on the bulletin board, and then I'd share them that way. Now, if a student makes an image, a photo, draws something, creates a graph, a line curve, I can immediately have them share it. So the way we do that is with something called Padlet. So if you go to padlet.com right now, /jdamaso1/webinar, you could even scan that QR code if you're so inclined, you'll see a screen that looks like mine. So be aware, don't click on the webinar screen right now, actually go to your browser and go to Padlet, and this link should be in the discussion area of the webinar software. So when you get there, you're going to double click the screen, and I'm going to ask you to share right now something. So here's how it looks. Let's see how it looks live. And we have some users already. And like my students, I tend to deploy, and then as they're struggling through it, then explain. And I think that's the demographic that I teach, instead of giving them here are the 10 steps. So most of you are dropping your Padlets right onto the pad here. And as a teacher, I can organize them. I can move them around. So like my students, you're also using the software in a way that benefits you. So some of you are still answering questions here. Some of you are saying, here's a great thing I use called Nearpod, Google Forms. So I'm asking you, this is sort of a best practices sharing space. Go ahead and click anywhere on this bulletin board. Maybe tell us your name in red, that's what I like. You can even add an image, and some of you are very good at this. Add an image, or you can add a link. That's an unexpected image that popped up there. I see teachers even saying, I'm going to use Google Forms right now to survey my students, or here's an example of mine. Now, if you bookmark this Padlet, you can come back here as teachers in this webinar continue to share. Now, some of you may be on an iPad, some of you are on a Chromebook or a desktop computer. I think some of you are struggling with how to leave your note, how to edit it. You want to get to that little green pencil icon, and that'll now enable you to not only write your name in red, but right below that, you should be able to write a message. So again, some comments about the quality of Poll EUV. Some of you are pushing your way down the bulletin board here, which is great. YouTube, of course. Although that YouTube icon looks like a Reese's peanut butter cup. I want to eat that. There's someone's dog. And there was a question up on the screen, what do you do with inappropriate responses? I wouldn't use Padlet right away. I would use Poll Everywhere. And Poll Everywhere has some tools where you can get rid of foul speech automatically. But this is really a larger question about classroom management. So if you're present with your students, that's mentor from the center. If you're present, sometimes they self-police, but If it becomes extremely inappropriate, then that student would likely lose that privilege of interacting in that way. That's not the fullest answer. I know this is a deeper conversation, but for right now, maybe I'll rely on you guys. I'll crowdsource that question. What do you do with those inappropriate responses? Again, if it's cool enough and it's engaging enough, they don't even think to go in the inappropriate direction. Again, that's my experience. I'm going to kind of return us. If you want to continue sharing here, that's totally fine. This is one of those meaningful diversions, so to speak. Just as an example, I'm back in the webinar now. You should see on your screen one of my Padlets. We studied the very famous poem, This Is Just to Say by William Carlos Williams, and my students wrote emulation or parody poems and posted them here. What a great way to take a common prompt and then look at the proliferation and diversity of responses. Again, something that I could do through Poll Everywhere, but visually, this is a great way to share short writing assignments, images, graphs, etc. Okay, another way to engage. Now, I think some of you are still in the Padlet, which is great, and that leads me to my next point about backchanneling. I think it's important with all the different learning types we have and student types to give them an opportunity in the background to ask questions, answer questions, and to deepen discussion. So the way I do this is with Today's Meet. So navigate there, if you would, right now in your browser to todaysmeet.com/my last name, Damaso. And what Today's Meet allows is for students to join a discussion. And as a teacher, during a discussion, I can use projector view to have a stream of all these student contributions. So again, I hope this works for you. You should go to todaysmeet.com/Damaso. And after entering your nickname, you should be given the opportunity to add a comment. There you go. And so, yeah, I'm not reinventing the wheel. A lot of teachers engage these tools. I think for me, the tools are out there and they're mostly easy to use. It's how do you ideate to come up with new ways to use these tools? And that's why you come to this webinar. That's why I want to connect with you on Twitter. Some of you have never seen this before, and of course you're a large group, so if you're overwhelmed with this stream, I understand, but in a class of 15, 20, 30, 40 even, it can work as a back channel. And you'll see right below your comment is your name. So if you get students in the habit of using their real names, that will help you track it. You could use it for credit as well. My students have even created their own conventions, right? They'll use hashtags, they'll use @ references to speak directly to someone. And they'll even write in capital letters, stop commenting, we've changed the discussion to this other focus. So in that way, they're very self-policing. They're not thinking about inappropriate things because they're, in my experience, engaged. And I'll even let introverts type back and forth to each other in the same room while the conversation is going another way. I find that to be another kind of engagement. I'll have a student maybe monitor this back channel and then say, Mr. D, there's a common question everyone has, it's this. Or I'll look up there and say, hey, let's bring this question into the face-to-face part of our discussion today. So I'm seeing, again, whenever you deploy something like this, you're going to get students who just say, hey, or first comment, or I'm from Utah, or hello from Tucson. And, I think some of you are testing me. There's some mildly inappropriate ones in here about my looks. That's nice. But again, like I said at the beginning, it's a place where students can ask questions, answer questions, deepen discussion, or even go on a tangent. Sometimes tangents lead to great thinking, great ideas. So I'm going to leave this open for you. Maybe this encourages you to open up Backchannel maybe in your first department meeting or maybe in a class as well. So I'm going to head us back to our presentation. Next thing I want to talk about is in the old days when a student had a question, I wouldn't know until at the end of class I said, any questions? Or I'd say, oh, we're out of time, come to office hours. Now I use Remind. Many of you probably use Remind, but I use it in lots of different ways. So Remind is an app. It's also a texting service that allows me to communicate changes of schedule, due date changes. I can send out assignment links, all to mobile devices. And I've written a blog for Remind about ways that I try to engage students, the kind of messages that they value. So here are all my classes in Remind, even my student clubs are in there, and with a couple keystrokes, I can send messages to them, like welcome back to school. Here's a change in a reading schedule or a due date switch. Sometimes I'll even send animated GIF files, or I can send voice memos. And when they receive one of these in the app on an iPad, iPhone, many different devices, Android as well, they can use stamps to tell me like they received it. Or I can ask a question there of them at home. How many of you remembered your permission to travel form for the field trip? You can even send voice notes. I know a Spanish teacher that will send them a voice note every night with the instructions in Spanish only to do something very specific, and then she can see the next day if they understood her Spanish language voice memo to them, sent directly to their devices. There's now a new feature in Remind that allows you to chat with individual students or with small student groups. And what's lovely is they don't have your cell phone number, you don't have theirs. It's all moderated through the Remind app ecosystem. So I'm happy to take questions later about that. Typically, at this point in a lecture or a discussion, I'll say, ooh, let's check the back channel. So if you go back to the back channel, I can see, is there a character limit? I actually don't know the answer to that. This could be overwhelming for the instructor. Yes, yep, it absolutely could. So you kind of want to use it maybe in a limited fashion, maybe tell students, one question per session. That's really up to you. Again, this is a free service, and you can set up lots of rooms. Mine's todaysmeet.com/Damaso. You can make it open for an hour, for a day, for a month. Again, this is where I get to step away, and then you guys solve your own problems, which is pretty awesome. You guys are using conventions like and you're trying to answer each other's questions. I'm going to head right back to the webinar screen. Some of you are still in the back channel, but why don't you come on back. And now I want to talk more about how I engage via giving good feedback to students. In the old days, I'd mark up the margins of a paper or maybe send a narrative note by email. Today, I don't so much want to give them feedback at the end. I want to be there during the creation of the assignment. So I want to accompany students within their work. And lately, I've been using Google Classroom for that. If your school or university is signed up with Google Apps for Education, Classroom is included. Here's what it looks like. Just a very quick overview. You can post announcements there or assignments. You can take in pretty much any file type you want. Here are my assignment descriptions from last term. I can see how many I've graded, what I have not graded, when it was due. On the assignment list, what's so cool about this assignment is that I asked students in a private comment stream to me, I asked them to relay particular concerns they had with this piece of writing, or to help target the kind of feedback I was going to give them. So, hey, Mr. D, I'm really interested in my transitions. Can you focus your feedback there? So I could read their private note, and then I could jump into their assignment. When I was done, I could very quickly assess a grade. I could click return, and then students would get an email with a link right back to the Google Classroom environment. So very, very easy to score. Within an actual assignment, I want to be there with them. So as they're drafting, I can highlight text. I can answer their questions or ask them questions through a teacher-student dialogue on the right side. I can even deploy a single Google document to all 28 of my AP students and have us as a group annotate a single document. I may at the top, scavenger hunt style, say, everyone needs to find one of the rhetorical devices we're studying, highlight it, label it, and then describe how it's being used by the author. And then I can chime in with, ooh, you missed the mark there. Ooh, great job. And students can be required to reply to each other there in the margins. So group annotation is awesome. Just on the topic of Google Docs, and then I'll take questions. I use Google Docs to organize my entire semester's weekly assignments week by week. I hyperlink each week at the top, and then each week has a very easy to comprehend grid of what we're doing each day in class, what I'm sending them home to do, links that go to not only websites but also to other Google Docs or to YouTube videos or any number of places. So I share this with you because a lot of the teachers at my school like this method, and if you email me or tweet at me, I can send you a template that I can share with you where you could just pop in your activities and homework, and I've got the whole semester laid out. So I know that's a lot, and we have about 12, 13 minutes left, and I have a couple more things to show you, but any questions right now? So I'm going to leave the presentation for a moment and check out some of the questions that you might be having. So again, if you head over to the GoToWebinar section for asking questions, some of the organizers are helping me prioritize. This question says, is the AP English 3 course outline in Google Classroom or in another LMS? What a great question. We can probably debate whether Google Classroom is considered an LMS. I would probably say it's not at this time, but we use Canvas. We had used Blackboard for 12, 13 years. But what I do is I embed that course outline, that Google document, directly into Canvas. So students navigate to Canvas, I can live update that Google Doc, and those changes will be reflected. Question, kind of a basic teaching question, do you lay out all your semester before it begins? Well, I have Google Docs from the last several years, so what I do is I open that old semester document, and then I create a new one next to it. And like any good teacher, you're recycling the good stuff and you're ditching the not so good stuff. So I have learning outcomes and where I want to get my students by the end of the semester, but I'm kind of planning week to week, using some of old material and inserting new. A couple more questions here. How many of these are free? Everything I've shown you is free. Yeah, everything I've shown you is free. I'm going to show, unless Google Classroom, however, it requires your district or school to have an account with them. So that is the only paid service. The last two are paid services that I'm going to show you. Poll everywhere, open-ended versus today's meet, pros, cons. I really think today's meet is more for back channel discussion. I think poll everywhere is more for focused, specific questions that you want to discuss in the class, because you can do brainstorming, you can do word clouds. I would use poll everywhere, today's meet for kind of more rambling discussion where you get those unexpected eureka moments. Another question, if you have 85 students like I do in medical education, what would your focus on individual evaluation of mastery on assignments, what would it be? I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, but in the last two segments of this presentation, I'm going to show you software I use in English to individually track hundreds of students. And I'm imagining something similar might be possible in your field. Is most of the Google Doc work you've shown done in class or as part of homework, out of classroom work? A combination. It's a college prep, so there's a good amount of work that's done outside of the classroom. I tend to call it the work as opposed to homework these days, and sometimes the work gets done in class, sometimes it gets done in between classes or at lunch or on the bus or on the light rail, or sometimes it gets done at home. Last question for this segment, have you tried Google Communities for backchanneling? Thoughts on that? I haven't. I've had some colleagues create Google Plus communities to interact with school groups from other parts of the world, but I found it a little bit unwieldy for my purposes. I'm sort of a shoot from the hip kind of teacher. I like to create polls, on the fly. I like to send reminds when I'm remembered to do so. And so I think anything that requires deep setup, like Google Plus communities, in my opinion, I tend to shy away from. But that's just me. I'm going to share my screen again for our last few minutes here, and hopefully get us back on track. With the last section. So how do I engage my students, my English students? In the old days, to study vocabulary, you give them flashcards, they memorize them, they take the quiz, then they forget them. That sounds like a horrible way to learn and to teach. In terms of grammar, the old way was maybe a one-size-fits-all grammar book. You go page by page, no matter if students know the material or don't. So couple of solutions I found that I brought to Brophy are Membean and No Red Ink. So I'm just very quickly going to show you. And the reason I'm showing you, you're not all English teachers. Very few of you are, in fact. But all I did was Google better way to learn vocabulary, online grammar application, and I found these. I think in all of your fields, whether you're teaching biochem or linguistics or finance or sociology or computer science or art history, whatever it is, I think there's a solution out there. I can help you try to find it too. Plus, in terms of engagement, my students love both of these things. At the end of the year, I surveyed them on the tools we used, and they, in particular, loved Membean and No Red Ink. So first, Membean, it's a vocabulary trainer. It gives them all sorts of portals into a word, 9 in fact. They can watch a video using the word, read examples from the Wall Street Journal, read the word in context, check out word ingredient maps. They can answer a quick quiz question, develop a mnemonic device, look at constellations of how that word's related to other words. It just dumps them right into training. Then I can see how their training is going. I can see which student, and all these horizontal bars are my students, how many new words they encountered. I'm not obsessed with them all learning the same 250 words. They do a diagnostic and they start at different points. I can see how many they got correct or incorrect, and that will help me mediate. In the old days, all my students would learn, quote unquote, 250 words. Now I have students learning anywhere between 400 and 1,500 words, depending on their pace. And they can start at any number of levels and they can advance. I can give them quizzes, which they all ace for the most part because Membean really duplicates its efforts in achieving mastery. Here is every single question or word one student faced in a learning session. So I can say, ooh, you're not spending enough time on the new word pages, which are in blue. Or, ooh, when you get something wrong in orange, you're not spending enough time on restudying that word page. I try to engage. Remember I said connect students to the outside world. Got some t-shirts from Membean, made that a prize, gave a prize t-shirt to Matt here, and then Membean responded in kind by congratulating Matt. And that kind of made his day and others. This is the best pie chart in the world. This is me asking my students, was this not only a good tool, but should they be required to use it? That's the key words there, required. 100% said yes. That's all I have to say about Membean. I think it speaks for itself. Pretty excellent piece of software. Finally, No Red Ink. What you see on the right here is the most boring list of grammar rules. But the next slide I'm going to show you is how I begin to engage students. Instead of saying, do you know what a passive voice verb is, I say, who are your favorite athletes, historical figures, bands, brands, and from there, by updating their interests, No Red Ink will build sentences about their interests, whether it's US presidents and authors or their friends and their pets' names. So you put the cat Mona's name in there, and that will appear in sentences as you're training on different grammatical components. I can give assignments to entire classes. I can give them to specific students. I can choose from all sorts of categories. I can give them diagnostics and then decide what I need to teach and what I cannot teach. I think that's a big part of our work, is figuring out what we don't have to teach. If there's mastery there, why are we reteaching it? So you'll notice this student got 5 in a row correctly, so it skipped them to more difficult questions. Here we were working on commas, but I really wanted to see their progress in particular comma usages. So I could see vertically class trends, and I could see horizontally student trends. So here's a student that really struggled in this middle section, all these red dots. Vertically, dealing with fragments and commas was something that I could do a pop-up grammar lesson of, because No Red Ink gave me that great data. So I could see where their mastery was, whether the engine behind No Red Ink even had enough data to say or not. That's the difference between a circle here and a rectangle. So here's just an example of what we work through. Again, I don't teach a lesson, they just answer this question. Can they identify active versus passive? If they get it wrong, they get a little pop-up lesson down here. And you might say, well, that's just forced choice. That's pretty easy. There are also other types. So if they get it wrong, they can try a similar problem, and it'll give them a different type. Here's one where they had to distinguish active versus passive. They took this original sentence here at the top, And then they had to transform it by moving elements around. And that activity on the screen of pressing with your finger a word or word phrase and moving it and changing the verb tense or changing subject to object, that's I think where mastery is demonstrated. So I asked them the same question about no red ink. Pretty good results, similar to Membean there. So a lot of teachers and students even will ask, how do you find these things? So I want to kind of give you some tools of how to find them. When you have access to this presentation and you click on this purple window, it will open up a list of 15 ways that I find new apps. I'm just going to highlight a few of them. You may have heard of StumbleUpon. It's a website. And if you tell Stumble what you're interested in professionally, whether it's literature or writing or differential equations and calculus, and then hit Stumble, it will show you something related to that that you would not find in an ordinary Google search. Similarly, other organizations like ISTE, if you're not a member, I would consider going to one of their annual conferences in July. A lot of great practices shared there, a lot of these companies represented there. Here we have iTunes University, some great universities like Stanford, MIT. They have entire course modules there that you can cherry pick, if you will. EdTech Teacher, great chance to go to a conference in Boston or San Diego, maybe do a Chromebook conference or an iPad conference. I get lots of ideas there. And then finally, Twitter. If you're resisting Twitter, that's totally fine. You don't have to get an account. You can even just go to Twitter and search. If you go to Twitter and search these hashtags, you'll see conversations going on amongst professionals who are really interested in student engagement. These are some of the ones that I use. EdTech, that's all new educational technology, and its corresponding chat. Education Chat. EdiPad, that's for people interested in iPad deployment. English Chat, English and Social Studies Chat. Special Education Chat, Science Chat. Maybe you want to flip your classroom. There's the Flip Class Chat. These are all ways that I cherry pick, modify, deploy, and assess new educational technology. Okay, I know that was a whirlwind, but one last question for you. Can you articulate one of your takeaways in 5 words or fewer? I'm going to take us back to our poll EV. It should be deployed. And when you get to pollev.com/Damaso, you have an opportunity to kind of take some of the apps, some of the web services, even maybe a kernel of an idea for a lesson, concretize it, put it into a little capsule of 5 words or fewer, and contribute it. Now, one thing about word clouds is they definitely will rend apart your original phrasing, and all we're going to be left with is a key word. And that's okay. If we were in a large conference together, we would then use this as grounds for discussion. So what's popping out is the word apps, the word use. Probably as a verb and a noun here, right? What do you plan to use? What's a good use? I see remind is popping up. And on your screen, this is repopulating as well. Sometimes what I'll do at the end of a discussion in class like this is I'll screenshot this, and then I'll send it through Remind to my class. Hey, this is what we discussed today. And that might be a multiple choice question, or it might be one of these word clouds. So it looks like on the back end, Poll Everywhere has limited us to our top 10 most frequently used words. And that's a really cool way. So if you have 1,000 words in your word cloud and you want to use Poll Everywhere to limit that, you can turn that into a word cloud of 3, 4, 5, 10 words, and then make this the grounds of your discussion. So we have engagement, use, remind, students, awesome, Membean, apps, Padlet, and poll. I think those are good takeaways, and of course the word engagement at the top. So you did 3 polls, you made a Padlet, you entered the back channel with today's meet, and we proceeded through a good amount of material here. If you want access to everything you saw today, you can scan that code right now with your device, or you can go to the link that's at the very bottom of the screen, or you can go to the webinar discussion area. There should be a link there as well. If you want to engage in conversation with me via Twitter or email, please do that as well. And at this time, I'll take the remaining questions because we're, I think, butting up against our hour here pretty soon. So I'm headed on over to the webinar tools, so you should be able to hear me. The question says, how much time did it take you to set this up? And I imagine you're referring to this 60-minute webinar. I will say that I recycled some of these slides from other presentations, but because I care so much about this topic and I've never spoken to so many people without seeing their faces, I put half dozen hours, maybe up to 10 hours into preparing for this. Is there a Membean equivalent for foreign languages? We've lobbied them, especially for Spanish, and their product became so popular so quickly that they put all of their energy into making the English vocabulary component the best it can be. So as far as other languages or grammar or other things, right now their core business is English vocabulary. I can introduce you, if you'd like, to the CEO there. Question, to do all these great activities, how many hours per day are you using to plan and correct? And I didn't really even talk much about correcting, but in English teacher's life, that's a huge part of it. I think my passion is in this immediate deployment of technology, so it doesn't feel like work or prep when I'm doing it. So, I'm at school like you are, many of you, from 7:30 until 4 or 5 o'clock, and then I bring home, a couple hours of work. So it's like, passion project, weekend work. So the short answer is a lot of hours. Post email, please. Oh, I'm going to pop my email address into this area for you right now. And it is the beginning of the school year, so I may be a little delayed in answering specific questions, but I'll do my best. Do your students' grades get better with immediate deployment? I think they respect the fact that I'm not giving them 2, 5, 10-year-old material. I'm trying to engage them where they are. I think their learning and their engagement both go up. I think you asked specifically about grades. I think their meaningful use of vocabulary goes up with Membean. I think their nuanced understanding of grammar has increased a bit with No Red Ink. We're still in our infancy, for example, with No Red Ink. This is the first year we're deploying it to all freshman and sophomore classes at the high school level. So I would say engagement and learning definitely go up. And without engagement, I think learning trails far behind. So it's okay if a teacher covers material, but covering it doesn't mean that a student is learning it. I'm more concerned with the learning part. Couple more questions here. During teacher preparation, are schools equipping teachers with this kind of engagement? I'm from Canada, and our teacher preparation is lacking. I'm going to answer that question a couple of ways. I think one is, I think you're asking, are teachers trained with these tools? And then the other question I think you're asking is, when teacher training happens, are these tools used to actually teach the teachers? I hope that was clear. I can only speak for my school. We're sort of an independent school, part of a network of 60 Jesuit high schools, but I use this, in my department. I try to model good technology use, but a lot of it is sort of, from a teacher's passion for educational technology, or maybe your passion is, Socratic seminars or Harkness. And if you use that passion and you utilize it in the classroom, sometimes that can spill over to other teachers. Sometimes students will say, hey, why don't we use No Red Ink in our English class? Or why don't we use Kahoot? Or why don't we use Poll Everywhere? I'm going to move to another question. Can you enter your own vocabulary words into Membean? The answer is no at this time. They have different sets. So they have kind of English vocabulary for junior high. They have SAT preparation. They even have GRE preparation. So those are different tiers of vocabulary. The high school level, if a student completes the entire program, which I've only had 5 students do in 3 years, it's about 1,500 kind of high caliber SAT style words. The pricing I'll leave to the companies. There's a question here about the cost. I can introduce you to those companies, but I think it depends on the number of licenses, the school district, and some other factors. But I will say we got the cost to a place that departmentally doesn't feel too immense. I would say think of an expensive paperback. It's less than that. A couple more questions. I'm going to allow the organizers to cut me off when we're finished here. How would you give advice for old school teachers so we don't feel so overwhelmed? What a wonderful question. One of the best parts of teaching in a school is to be with brand new teachers and to be with very experienced teachers. In my department, there's a 25-year-old teacher and there's a 67-year-old teacher, and they have different strengths and different experiences. My advice for someone that is interested in trying but maybe feels overwhelmed or fearful is to try one thing. That's why I asked you guys to contribute one takeaway and to partner with someone. If you hear from your students that so-and-so is absolutely wonderful with this technology, go find that teacher and say, I hear great things from your students. I hear you do this cool polling. Will you show me how to do it? And really, I think peer-to-peer is the best way to learn this in terms of teachers. So I think that brings us to the end of the webinar and the Q&A. Once again, please find me at Mr. John Damaso on Twitter or at jdamaso@brophyprep.org. And I hope that I can learn from you in the coming weeks as we prepare for this new school year.
Thank you, John, for today's webinar. You showed us great tools to help reach and interact with students one-on-one, and then tailor your interactions with each student based on his needs. Thanks for sharing what you find effective in your classrooms. And I'd like to thank all of you for attending today's webinar. I'd encourage every one of you to try at least one thing you learned here today in your own classrooms. Please be sure to share with us via Twitter or Facebook how it's going. We'll email you a link to today's recording in a couple of days. I wish you all a great school year. With that, I'd like to end this webinar. Goodbye.